Something that we've been seeing for decades happen throughout our country, but has become way more apparent over the past 5 years, is essentially the death or the extinction of the middle class. Some people summarize it based on how much income you make or your social status, things like that. But really what it comes down to is your lifestyle. Your middle class lifestyle is what makes you middle class or not. And I want to break down this excellent study I found recently that kind of gives an insight into what people think should be considered middle class, but in fact what actually is middle class. Because we all know that inflation is killing our daily budgets right now, and people that maybe used to be middle class are now being demoted to basically poor or under the poverty line in some cases because of how much the cost of living has gone up over the past 4 years. So the Washington Post did a poll, and just over 1/3 of US adults have the financial security that meet the definition of being middle class. Because when you break down all of the social and economic factors that make people middle class or not, it actually becomes more of a fantasy than a reality for a lot of people who actually consider themselves middle class. So about 90% of adults that were surveyed for this agree that there's about 6 factors or indicators of financial security and stability that make you middle class or not. And what these are: a secure job, the ability to save money for the future, ability to afford an emergency $1,000 expense without debt, ability to pay all bills on time without worry, having health insurance, and ability to retire comfortably. And then of course there's other things here on the list as well that kind of make up what would be middle class, but it's not as widely agreed upon, like having a job with paid sick time, time and money for vacations, being able to own a home. In fact, only 60% of adults surveyed saying being able to own a home makes you middle class, by the way. Ability to eat at a restaurant whenever you want, and a college education. When you take a closer look at what all these things mean for people in order to be middle class, is it kind of all boils down to both financial security today and in the future. Because like, people want a secure job, right? They want to be able to save money for the future. They want the ability to retire. They want the ability to be able to pay for a $1,000 emergency without worrying about putting it on the credit card. Even just paying your bills on time, guys. These are all things that should be kind of standard financial stuff, but this is what most people think makes you middle class today. So if you don't fit into one of these categories, then really you're not living the middle class life. And here's the problem, guys. Even though this is what most people agree is middle class, only about 1/3 of all Americans fit into this actual category. When you take a look at this cascading chart, it kind of shows you at the very top you have 100% of all American adults, and as you start filtering out more and more of these requirements, it shows you at the very end really only about 35% of people meet this criteria, which means 65% do not. And here's the other problem. You can't just say you are middle class or not based solely on your income, because depending on the size of your family and where you live, that can vary greatly. In fact, when you just look at the raw numbers, technically a middle class income would be anywhere between 2/3 and twice the national median income, which is about $67,800 a year, all the way up to $203,000 a year. Most Americans consider themselves middle class if they make anywhere between $75,000 and $100,000 a year. But one of the most common barriers to being middle class today is the future ability to be able to retire comfortably. In fact, only about half of the people fit into this category of people who are 35 years or older. They're feeling like they're on track to achieve that. The other half are not, guys. And it turns out that according to a separate Gallup poll last year, that people's ability to retire is Americans' #1 financial worry, both for people who are in retirement now and people who are wanting to retire. Because basically the game that everybody has to play with retirement right now is you have to, save like crazy and hope you don't live too long. I mean, what kind of life is that, guys? Like, you work your whole life trying to retire, you get into it, and now you got to hope that you die sooner than later before you run out of money and you're dead broke. I mean, that doesn't sound like very much fun to me. Unfortunately, it's the reality for a lot of people. So not only do most Americans not have a pension anymore, but also people's student loan payments, the rising cost of housing, and literally everything we have to buy now is eating into a larger chunk of what people should be able to save for retirement. And once again, guys, this is another reason why this track that we're on right now in this economy is completely unsustainable, because you can't have the majority of people not be able to afford a regular life that's worth living for and expect the whole system to not fall apart, okay? Because at some point, people are just gonna throw up their hands and say, what am I even doing this for? Why am I gonna work my entire life just to be able to put a roof over my head that I'm never home in because I'm always out working to try to pay for everything? But really, it's not too much to ask for when you break it down, guys. Like really, having a secure job with predictable wages, health care, being able to retire in the future as a guarantee, like that doesn't really seem like a lot to ask for. But that dream is being stripped away for most people one point at a time. But I think this puts us in a dangerous position overall in our country, because in order for people to want to go out there and thrive and work and get ahead in life, you need to feel like that's going to be possible, right? If you feel like it's impossible to actually make any progress, I think a lot of people are just going to end up giving up. And unfortunately, I don't see this getting any better anytime soon, because we recently got the newest inflation numbers and it's heading in the wrong direction once again. Inflation is at 3.1% in January, which is still lower than the month before in December, which was at 3.4%. But really, guys, you can't believe any of these numbers. I'm going to show you in a little bit here what the real numbers should be if they still calculated inflation and unemployment how they used to. And one of the big problems with this recent report is that a lot of people thought that this was going to be coming in lower. Everybody thought that inflation was going to continue going lower than it actually has been. And since it's not, this is going to change the Fed's outlook on when they're going to start cutting rates. And here's the problem, guys. This whole euphoria that we see in the stock market right now is all based on the Fed cutting rates in May, okay? Because they know that obviously it's not going to happen in March, but a lot of the euphoria that we've seen recently is based on the assumption that rates will be cut in May of this year. But as these inflation targets continue to be missed, and well as the job numbers coming in hotter than expected, even though that's a big lie too, all it's going to do is it's going to delay the Fed from cutting interest rates. And what's happening right now is just a big reminder that this whole thing that we're going to achieve this soft landing and get back down to 2% inflation with no consequences to this economy is a fantasy, guys, because you have to remember that the longer we go with these higher interest rates, the more businesses are going to start collapsing and suffering, especially due to the amount of debt that needs to be refinanced. We see this with businesses, especially in commercial real estate right now. These higher interest rates are crushing businesses and commercial real estate. And that's gonna just continue to be a huge problem unless interest rates magically go down to where they were before all the hikes started, which is not gonna happen. But here's where it gets really scary, okay? They say inflation's at 3.1% right now. Well, if we look at shadow stats and see what inflation would actually be in 1990, if we calculated it as we did back then, we can see here that inflation would be hovering around 8%. But if you go back to the 1980s calculation, you can see that it would be hovering around 12 and 12.5% right now, which ironically enough, these numbers seem to make way more sense than what we're being told today. But what's really scary is the unemployment, guys. If we calculated unemployment like we used to, it would be hovering around 25% right now. And basically the old way of counting unemployment ended back in 1994. So they come up with all these new formulas and magic figures to be able to make the economy look better than it really is, because we're not allowed to have recessions. But the financial markets and people are just reeling to know when are interest rates going to come down. Even people that are looking to buy a house are desperate to know when are interest rates going to come down. And it's like, instead of focusing on that, what people should be doing, they should be looking at how can I take advantage of the situation now that interest rates are higher, because there are ways to do that. We've covered them here before on the channel. You can earn good money with CDs right now and high yield savings accounts, as well as buying T-bills. There's a lot of ways you can take advantage of these higher interest rates and make it work for you in your favor, rather than sit here and complain about it and wonder when it's going to go down. That's what I'm doing. I'm loving these high interest rates, guys. Earning over 5% on my saved money right now without having to lift a finger is awesome. Especially as a landlord, somebody who has gone through all kinds of crap to earn a decent return on my income. To be able to just sit there and do nothing right now and earn a good return, I'm happy with that. And I realize that that number's lower than what the potential inflation numbers could be at 8 or 12.5%. I'd rather be getting 5.5% on my money than nothing. But you see, the date keeps getting pushed back and pushed back of when we might expect to see the first rate cut. You know, the market was all betting that there was going to be this first rate cut in March. It's not going to happen. Then it got pushed to May, and after this most recent release of the inflation data, now they're saying June. So it looks like maybe this guy we talked about the other day might be right, that maybe there'll be no rate cuts this year. If the first one's already potentially being pushed to June and things don't go exactly to plan, there might not be any rate cuts this year. And I, for one, am totally fine with that. Loretta Mester, she is the president over at the Cleveland Fed, and she says that, you know, there's no real sense of urgency here to lower rates. We just need to keep watching the data and wait for the right time. And right now is not the right time. And it doesn't seem like they particularly care when the right time is going to be, whether it's before, after the election. There's always the chance that there could be a political agenda, but as of right now, they're not budging. And you know, here's the big problem, guys. Even though we had this CPI reading at 3.1%, and we're all supposed to believe that inflation has been squashed and we're just getting so close to that soft landing, here's the reality. The things that really cost a lot of money for us are still going up in price tremendously. Because here's some key figures from this report. You have car insurance inflation 20.6% right now, transportation inflation at 9.5%, hospital services inflation 6.7%, car repair inflation 6.5%, homeowner inflation 6.2%, rent inflation 6.1%, food away from home inflation 5.1%. And as you can see, we need most of that stuff to function in our everyday lives. To me, it's clear by just looking at those figures right there that they're doing some financial wizardry to get this CPI reading to come in at 3.1%, because it should be closer to what the shadow stat says it should be, anywhere between 8 and 12% with what we've been seeing going on. And I think everybody can attest to that based on just going out and buying everyday things and paying your bills. Now, the other day I made a video, which you guys really seem to love, about food inflation and how basically the price of food is looking like it might remain permanently high like it is right now. Somebody brought to my attention, well, Michael, if the fuel prices come down, then that could influence the price of food in the future and potentially bring it down some more, which is possible. Yeah, maybe we can see that in the future if we start producing more oil again and see the cost of oil go down. But for now, these high food prices are here to stay until something like that happens. But the problem is we would all be quick to blame the grocery store for our food prices going up, which is actually not true. It's the food producers that are responsible for the massive hikes in grocery prices that we've been seeing, because these food production companies have been raking in record profits since the pandemic. And the reality is, running a grocery store has always been a low margin business, but because of these high prices right now, it's making it even tougher for grocery stores to stay in business when you factor in how little that they can actually increase their own margin to make some money. And also, with all of the big grocery companies starting to merge, that's kicking out smaller mom and pop grocery stores out of the business altogether. And consumers' perception of how much money grocery stores make on the margin is actually way off, because when asked, most people think that grocery stores bring in about a 35% net profit on the goods that they sell, but actually it's closer to only 1%, guys. So grocery stores are only making a 1% profit on almost everything you buy there. Now, during the height of the pandemic, when a lot of restaurants were closed and things like that, it did go up to 3% briefly, but has since come back down. So even in the best of times, in the best case scenario where people can't even go anywhere else to get food, their margins only creeped up to 3%. So these grocery stores are in quite the conundrum right now because people cannot afford to spend as much as they used to be able to at these grocery stores due to their budget and their dollar not stretching as far. So people have to cut back on the amount of items they buy, even though they're spending the same amount of money, if not more than before. And what this is doing is it's going to cause a lot of grocery stores to just simply go out of business, guys. I mean, it's truly crazy to think that a business that sells food, the number one essential that we all need to survive, can actually go out of business at a time like now when food prices are through the roof. It just doesn't seem like the natural order of things, but that's where we're headed. And this is the situation that these grocery store chains are facing. Since January 2020, they say grocery prices are up about 25%, but the cost to run a grocery store are up 28%. So these guys are actually making less money today than they did pre-pandemic, even though the cost of food is through the roof. So I think you can start to imagine why this is a problem for a lot of different reasons. If you have grocery stores that are starting to go out of business around the country, that means less places for you to be able to go and buy food. So it lowers your quality of life and the convenience factor of that, as well as the fact that everybody who works at these grocery stores are going to lose their job. That's going to be contributing to a faltering economy. And let's face it, guys, the less competition there is out there for anything, including food, and the less choices you have to shop at, that gives the remaining stores the ability to raise prices even further to try and up those 1% margins. So this is bad news all around for everybody because we all eat. So the whole point of this story really is to understand that when you go to the grocery store, don't necessarily blame the grocery store for these high prices and being greedy. It's because they need to charge these prices in many cases just to be able to stay in business. It's the food production companies that make the food and send the food to the grocery stores that are really responsible for these massive price hikes, because these guys got away with murder. They probably still are. They're still bringing in really high profits, and the best way to fight it, guys, is to stop buying things. Like the things that are really expensive that used to be cheap, stop buying it. That might help them lower the price once they realize people aren't willing to pay today's prices anymore. Also try to stay away from products that are, taking advantage of us and have shrinkflation. This was a thing during the Super Bowl, right? They make it look like things are the same price, but in fact, the amount of food inside of the packaging is less than before, so they're selling you less product for the same price, which is what shrinkflation is. So I think it's only a matter of time before everything just comes crashing down, guys. Like, we cannot keep seeing this level of failures with different parts of our fabric of society and just expect things to keep going. People cannot continue paying more for groceries. You can't have grocery stores closing, lowering people's ability to afford to eat or have even a place to buy food to eat. You can't have the price of housing and cars and utilities just continue to rise when people's incomes just don't keep up with it. At some point, that's going to break, and when it does, I think it's not going to look good for a long time. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.